Welcome to another episode of Something from the Margin of My Bible. And this week's note comes from Deuteronomy chapter 18. And if you're familiar with the book of Deuteronomy, you know you have the Ten Commandments. They're also given in Exodus chapter 20, but they're given earlier in the book of Deuteronomy. And then much like the book of Exodus, the book of Deuteronomy then lays out a whole lot of other laws that all sort of fall under the umbrella of the Ten Commandments. And the section that we're beginning with in Deuteronomy 18 and verse 9, the note will come from verse 11, as you see in the title, deals with practices, worship practices, occult practices, sometimes they're called. The English Standard Version gives this section the title Abominable Practices. But in specific, we're going to read verses 10 through 12, I should say, and the note's going to come from one word in verse 11. But just to set the context, Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 12 says this: "There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you." Now, you can do a pretty deep study into any one of those particular activities or sins, but the note that I have that I want to share with you on this episode comes from the word charmer. That's the way it's translated in the English Standard Version in verse 11. Again, the list in verse 11 is a charmer, a medium, necromancer, one who inquires the dead. The note that I have beside the word charmer is this, quote, "From a root for tying a knot, so likely has to do with spells." The word for charmer there the original word had to do with something like tying a knot. And so it had to do, it seems like, with some sort of almost physical activity, if you will, the movement of hands and such. And so again, the note continues by saying, so likely it has to do with spells. So it's probably the moving of the hands, the doing of certain things in order to try to bring about some intended result. And it became known as a charmer. In our modern world, we sometimes still hear of other lands that have things like snake charmers, and we know what that means, where they're doing something to try to bring about an intended result. And that's the idea here. These Israelites were told, don't have anything to do with these kind of magic charms, magic spells. And it's a reminder to us to not have anything to do with occult activities or language or anything along those lines, even today. So I hope that note encourages you as you sort of dive into these particular sins, these particular practices, and that one that might have a little more technical meaning. Maybe that'll encourage you as you study this passage later, and always study the Bible. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again next week on Something from the Margin of My Bible.